Oh, yeah.
Okay, hi, everybody. Continuing here, topic 8, and now moving on to topic 8.4. So we're talking about memory. 8.3 were the basic models to think about for memory. Baddeley's model of working memory, for example. And so this one is basically involved in the process of moving ideas, moving information between the working memory and long-term memory. So encoding is basically storing something in our long-term memory. Retrieval is bringing it back and remembering it. Okay. Remember our working memory, one of the ways we think of this is like our moment-to-moment consciousness. So when we have a conscious awareness, a conscious experience, it's because we're processing this experience in our working memory, aspects of that experience. So if we're not continuously rehearsing, what this means is reviewing, refreshing the material in our working memory, it fades after about 10 to 20 seconds. So we can keep it there forever if we keep repeating it, but that, that's not a robust way to store memories. So there's a couple of different ways then that we will rehearse to basically keep things active in the working memory or encode them in a deeper way so that they can be stored in long-term memory. So the first is the maintenance rehearsal. This is just the repeating in the head. This is like milk, bottle of milk, loaf of bread, whatever you're trying to remember in your head as you're going to the grocery store, or whatever you're trying to remember. You're trying to memorize lines for a play or something and you go over it in your head. And that iterative just number of times, the more times you hear a song, even if you're not really paying close attention to it, the more likely you are to, reactivate parts of it. So this is, kind of like this real shallow level of maintaining that information in your working memory. So we call that maintenance rehearsal. Elaborative rehearsal, this is a good way of describing what we go for with the process of learning. So learning, which you all are doing, right, involves taking in new information. It's in your working memory space right now. It's on your working desktop. But now we need to do some things to store what you are processing right now in a way that allows you to use that as knowledge later in exams and in life. Okay, so we find ways to rehearse this information that's elaborative. So we find basically not just repeating in our head, so to speak, like in maintenance rehearsal. This is actually seeking ways to organize this new incoming data, this new event, this sensory pattern, of information that's coming into your working memory. And if we can make relationships between what's happening right now, what's in our working memory desktop, and something meaningful to us that's easily stored in our long-term memory, like ourselves, okay, or like an experience I had, or like another class I took, or another thing I'm interested in. So anytime you can take whatever Ferris is talking about, whatever anybody in any class is talking about, and think to yourself, how does this relate to me, even in a loose way? What you're effectively doing is you're tapping into your very strong network of readily activated thoughts and ideas that's stored in your long-term memory. So if you're interested in something, I'm interested in music. So if I can relate some sort of material like the hearing and noise lectures to my interests, man, that sticks much more readily in my mind. And now I don't have to keep looking at my notes when I lecture on that topic, right? So finding ways, this is creating associations or finding ways to link the new incoming working memory data with something that is stored in a very robust way in your warehouse. It's like you've got a whole section in your warehouse, a very strong active section for music related memories, if you're me, right? And so let's take this new data and let's link it to the strength of that network. So I've got here, Kevin Bacon, the actor. And if you've ever heard of the game, what is it, 7 degrees or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, you pick a celebrity actor and linking through movies or through other movies or pieces with other actors. And eventually you can find something where you can link to Kevin Bacon, the actor. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that was probably a pretty crazy example. Go ahead and Google it, you'll find it. But the point of that is, if you are good at this game, you're also very good at knowing quite a bit, relationships among a new actor that might come into this game. So when you're networking these things, you're drawing basically connections among potentially related items in your brain. Think of this as like a cognitive map being represented as a visual thing here. So if you know, I can't even see any of these actors here other than Kevin Bacon. But if let's say you knew this actor here, and you know a little bit about them, and you had this sort of a memory storage structure, this would allow you to kind of traverse and access a lot more information that might be relevant to whatever you're currently dealing with in a working memory sense. All right, so in this class, as I do in all my other classes, I will continue to encourage you to do this. Relate anything that you are hearing in this class as often as you can to something else in your world that's meaningful to you. Your own life experience, good or bad, your another class experience. The more linkages you're able to build between what is going into your head right now, what's sitting on your working memory desktop, and what gets stored in a meaningful way that you can then access when you need to, that's about linking it to other stuff that's robustly stored in your memory. So relate it to your own life experience somehow. All right, there we go. Okay, so you may know there's a couple of strategies you can use in your own way to say, okay, well, how can I memorize this thing? How can I make what's in my working memory right now stick in my long-term memory? This idea of a mnemonic, it starts with an M, but it's pronounced with an N, mnemonic, I guess, or mnemonic, I don't know, mnemonic anyway. So take something that doesn't have a natural, logical order to it, and give some structure to it. So here's, musically, these are the notes of a treble clef staff, E, G, B, D, F. That can be very difficult for people to remember when they start learning music. And so one good, you have a phrase here, every good boy does fine, or every good boy deserves fudge or something. So, but what I've done is I've taken an arbitrary somewhat string of, items, and I've made them into a meaningful semantic contextual sentence, which is easier to recall. And then I can extract, okay, every good boy does fine. I can remember that fairly easily. And then I reverse engineer and I say, well, E, G, B, D, F, right? Okay, PIM. So remember we talked in the previous lecture about memorizing digits of pi, 3.14, right? So how I want to drink, alcoholic, of course, etc. Now count the letters in this poem. This poem meant to help you remember pi digits. So 3 letters, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, 2, 7. So it's pi represented as a, as a lyrical poem, right? Self-reference, just like I mentioned on the previous slide, anytime you can take what's going in and, what you're learning and say, this is how it relates to me, just self-reference, referencing it to yourself. That is a great way to encode it in long-term memory. Assume that memory will not last for, is not robust, is not reliable. It will fail. It will be corrupted. It will fail in in difficult to manage ways, like you'll have false memories. So, human factors, human systems professionals could say, well, let's try to avoid relying solely on the corruptible human memory. Let's use external memory aids, checklists. I mean, take a note on your phone, that is an external memory aid at this, this is something that we can reasonably assume is going to be part of most humans, in the workplace going forward. The ability to easily record what's going on and have an external memory device. Good. So this goes back to the displays principle, the principle of knowledge in the world, which was a memory principle to support, those aspects of memory. So put things that humans will have to know, but maybe you don't want to burden them on their corruptible memory. Put that in the world so it doesn't have to be remembered. Checklists, etc. All right. Okay, this is one of my favorite examples to talk about. So this guy up here, we all recognize him. Yeah, no, that's Plato, the the Greek scholar. And this is a method that Plato would use. And I always like to, put yourself in this class, in this lecture. So this professor here, Plato, would give, hours-long lectures, and would repeat topics, would be able to say, here I am to give my 3-hour speech on, I don't know, enlightenment and consciousness, whatever what Plato would talk about. So how does he do that? Because it's not like he's got PowerPoint to take notes for him, help him remember all the things he's going to say in 3 hours. It's not like he even has note cards, right? I mean, maybe we could get a stone tablet and carve it. I'm sure there's like parchment and things like that, but this is not how basically is too valuable for people to like take casual notes and then this is my memory aid. So back then, okay, and then this is still something that can be used today. This method we call the method of loci, and loci stands for, it's like the plural of locus. It's for like locations. And so the way this works is if you remember that really robust memory for in the visual spatial sketchpad working memory, how we can bring quite a bit of information into mind and consider the spatial aspects of it, where things are and what they look like, right? As opposed to what they represent. That's the more of the phonological loop and the semantic aspects of that form of memory. So, all right, so here's what Plato would do. So imagine he's got to give a lecture on, let's just say on attention, okay? So he's gonna start, okay, well, here are all the things I want to say about attention. I want to make sure people know that it's got all kinds of different models. And this is one model I like, which has focused, divided, and selective attention. And I want to talk about the searchlight metaphor because I think that works pretty well to illustrate that. So I want to talk about those things. I could either write them all down, but if I'm Plato, I don't have, the expensive parchment or quill or stone tablet to do that. So I use this method. And so the way this works is you create, and this can take some practice. That's what Sherlock Holmes is doing here. You can create a vivid mental, a fairly reliable, revisitable mental location, okay? And this is an example because it might be, it might be absurd. It might, this only exists in your head. The idea of a memory palace is one where you can close your eyes and imagine, and you can revisit in fine detail what's going on in that palace. And so I'll give an example. Now, you might look at this and say, how can I remember all that? Well, you can't, because that didn't come out of your own head, right? Now, what could come out of your own head is a very richly detailed spatial representation of a familiar place for you. So for me, I always say, I can remember so much. I can remember the aspects of living in my bedroom growing up. And I can remember what my bed felt like and what the carpet felt like and where the door was and where the garbage can was and where the basketball hoop was on the door and where my brother slept and where the garage was. And I can relive this for the rest of my life in extremely fine detail. And I can remember the step-by-step process of waking up, turning off my alarm clock, getting out of bed, feeling the carpet, walking past the garbage can, maybe dunking the basketball in the door, poking fun at my brother, opening the door, walking out the garage, to get my backpack. I'm assume I get dressed at some point. But all of these steps are something that I can relive and I can reimagine over and over and over. And I can do them with relatively little effort. And I have an immense number of things in this mental environment that I can associate with stuff I want to remember. Okay. So I'm giving this lecture on attention. So I'm going to say, all right, all I got to do now is mentally walk through this experience from my memory palace, my memory sort of recreated, my method of loci space, right? So I could say, okay, well, when I touch my alarm clock, I'm going to remember this is where I talk about, there are a lot of different models in memory. Okay. And then when I feel the carpet on my bare feet, that's when I know I'm going to talk about Baddeley's model. And however I associate the feeling of carpet with Baddeley's model, That may take some work. That may take some effort. That's where the studying comes in, right? For people like Plato. So, okay, well, what was I supposed to remember with the carpet? Oh yeah, the Baddeley's model. What do I remember when I walk past the garbage can? I see the garbage can in my mind, and I think, okay, that's where I talk about the searchlight metaphor. When I make fun of my brother, that's when I talk about, so the next thing, right? Whatever. But if I then go on the lecture circuit and I'm like, okay, here is Plato, Ferris, here to talk about, attention. Now, all I got to do is I'm up there on stage. I don't have any notes, but I can now reimagine myself in this memory palace, and I can walk through that very familiar, very rich representation of me getting out of bed from my childhood bedroom. And all of the things I experience in that process, if I can just relive that, which I can do reliably because it's so well stored in my head, I can store quite a bit of information. So I can go back, and all I got to do is think, okay, I walked past the garbage can, Baddeley's model, or I walked past, I forget whatever I did, but I'd have to really have those good associations. And then I can talk, I could mentally walk through getting out of bed, going to eat breakfast, going to brush my teeth, getting dressed, getting my backpack, walking to school, whatever. I can extend this experience, quite a bit. And then I can really tie almost an unlimited amount of information to this experience, which proceeds in time when I relive it in my mind. Okay. So yeah, so here's another example of this guy. So maybe it's your bedroom, maybe it's your kitchen. Maybe it's a totally made up place, but it's something that is completely reliably revisitable in your mental, in your mind's eye, in your visual spatial sketch pad. So yeah, when I see the apple, that's when I talk about Baddeley's model or whatever. So anyway, again, this is called the method of loci. This is, again, works well because of that robustness of the memory for storing and for processing spatial imagery, like where things are and what, like alligator on the ceiling, that's the information is spatially mapped because I encounter it when I traverse my space mentally in my head. Okay. All right. So there you go. Mental, a little trick. And this is actually something where, since Plato's days, memory competitions have taken advantage of this sort of technique. And so this is something that, oh man, I always wish that I had done this. So some year I'm going to give this lecture and I'm going to be like, here's a deck of cards, shuffle them up, and I'll be able to do this, because any of us can do this. It just takes the training to associate 52 cards with 52 things you can reliably bring to your mind that might exist in your memory palace. Okay. And then if these are meaningful things, just like when we talked about the guy who memorized the digits of pi, and he had the strings of numbers where he would think of races or distances or times where those numbers would be representative of that experience. And then he just remembers the races as opposed to the raw numbers. This guy is, this is a similar practice here. So you've got 52 cards, and you just have to be able to associate each card or some aspects of the card that allow you to encode and decode it with something very reliably familiar in your memory. So this guy, Ed Cook, he knows, and he knows of celebrities, as many people do. And so his coding method is, this literally, here's a shuffled deck of cards in a random order. You get, 1 minute, or in this guy, 43 seconds to memorize that order. And then you're given a new deck and you have to put it in the same order. So Ed Cook says, all right, here's my deck of cards. And his key is anytime there are, like, he's coded the suit and the card value. So for the suit, he would characterize the personality of a person. So hearts, and this kind of, oh, I heart you, these are people that he likes or loves. Diamonds, money, it's like are rich people. And I only wrote those two examples. I don't know what he used for clubs or spades. Profession, if you're you're an ace, maybe that feels like a sports star. If you're a queen, maybe you're a musician, or, the band Queen, for example, or, Queen Latifah. I don't know how you'd associate that, but queen maybe goes with musician. So then when he sees these cards, and let's say the first card is the Ace of Diamonds and the second is the Queen of Hearts, he has specific people in the real world that reliably associate with those cards, okay? So Tiger Woods is Diamond, he's a rich person, and Ace, he's a sports star. Lady Gaga is a musician, and it's somebody that Ed likes, you know? So, so Queen of Hearts, there you go. So then what happens is we no longer have these pretty much meaningless sequence of cards. We instead have a meaningful sequence of celebrities acting out something, okay? So then you just come up with a story. First card is the Ace of Diamonds. You say, okay, well, Tiger Woods went for lunch with Lady Gaga, and they went to go see Michael Jackson or Abraham Lincoln or whatever, you know, whoever's next. So, you know, whatever the next card is. But in this guy's mind, now he simply imagines, you know, a lunch in which Lady Gaga meets Tiger Woods, and they go and they sit down, and there's Abraham Lincoln sitting at the table or whatever. So, you know, it sounds ridiculous, but it's also image-based. And if those are meaningful people to you, or if you choose meaningful representations that can then fold into a spatial sort of story, this is a great way to, you know, really transform what is otherwise a impossible phonological loop challenge. You know, can you memorize and speak all of the cards in your head in your phonological loop? You can't do that, but our spatial memory is so robust, it's not limited by that 1.5 to 2 second internal, you know, answering machine tape. So it's a good way to expand effectively our memory, you know, across time. So there you go. Pretty cool memory trick. You have to do that for the exam. You have to, no, I'm just kidding. Well, you should know how this works generally for the exam, though. All right. Cool. Oh, yep. You can read more about this here. That's one example. I'm sure you can find a number of sites that coach you through this process, though. All right. So that was encoding. That was, what are these tricks to help us store things in our long-term memory in a way we can retrieve them? Now, what's the process of retrieving? Okay, so if we assume that everything that goes into the long-term memory is always there, unless we have like a literal, you know, removal of brain tissue, it exists somewhere. Now, the strength of the neural pathway to reactivate that cluster of, you know, those trace signatures that represent that thought, that can get lost with time. So that's like, again, the warehouse employee trying to remember where he stored that one piece of information. And if the pathways kind of, you know, degrade over time, it gets harder and harder to find his way, right? So when we talk about retrieval, you know, this is basically, I remember something. It may be flawed, but when we bring something from long-term memory back into working memory, this is the process of retrieval. When we forget things, this is actually a valuable function of our memory. And there are cases of people who literally can't forget things. And that sounds awesome in some ways, but in most cases, they will tell you it's torturous because you are just overwhelmed with irrelevant details, basically. So the memory is a way to basically save important conscious space for important information and let the other stuff kind of get lost in the warehouse and don't worry too much about it, okay? So the way that, you know, forgetting tends to happen, there's a number of ways that we have, you know, breakdowns in the process of retrieving something from long-term memory, interfering among multiple different similar items, you know, motivated forgetting. You know, there are bad things that happen to us that we don't want to relive with the same intensity for the rest of our lives. Every bad thing that happens to us, we have an ability to, you know, with time, mute it, and certain aspects of that bad experience no longer are as active in our mind. So this is a good thing. Right. So, okay. So a couple of things we can, you know, point to and think about when we're supporting humans when they retrieve things they need to. There is this asymptotic sort, well, exponential decay. And so there is a fairly sharp, you know, this is not any meaningful time units. This is basically just look at the shape here. There is an amount of time where it's pretty fresh in your mind. So if you've ever like, you know, hey, we just did this data collection, I'll go write my notes down like in another week or so. No, you should do it right away because you are losing information as you go, slowly. But you reach a certain point where there's just a steady state memory. Okay. And we'll talk about gist memory here at the end of this lecture. This would be about where you have the memory impression would be the gist of what happened. It wouldn't be very likely verbatim. In a lot of cases, it wouldn't be exactly right. It would be the gist of it, the basic ideas, right? Okay, the Van Resdorf effect. This is the stick out like a sore thumb a descriptor of this effect. So yeah, if something, I want to remember where all of these tomatoes are, well, that one that sticks out like a sore thumb is going to be more memorable naturally. I've got all these shoes. There's one that sticks out like a sore thumb. What do I remember about my visual scene? Very much so the thing that sticks out like a sore thumb is going to be prominent, in that memory. Primacy and recency. Okay. So when they say, the first impression is a strong impression, and it's very important to make a good first impression, like when you meet the parents for the first time. That's, this joke here, because the first time somebody meets you or forms a new memory about you is going to be particularly impactful for the rest of your relationship with that person because of the nature of how human memory works. So the first things we encounter that go with a certain idea or memory, the primary thing. So these tend to be stored more robustly. We call that the primacy effect. Then also the things that happened last. So, we had a nice week together, I forget what he's, Greg. Yeah, we had a nice week together. But I'm going to basically remember the first day you got here and you screwed up, and I'm going to remember the last thing you did on the last day and you screwed up. The stuff in the middle kind of blends together, doesn't have as high of an activation. So again, the first things and the last things, primacy and recency, are two aspects of, you've got a string of events happening, or for example, if you are, in a talent show and you want to be memorable, and there's 50 contestants, if you're the first, you're going to get preferential memory space and everybody will be compared to you, after that, for better or for worse. Or if you're the last contestant, you'll also be freshest in mind because you were most recently, up there. And so if you think you're pretty good and you're going to win a talent show, going first or last due to the primacy or recency effect would be a good strategy. There you go. All right. Now this matters, in a lot of realms where people are choosing things like voting. And so this is a good thing. But, if every ballot was alphabetically listed, then I guess whoever's, last name starts with an A would have a pretty significant advantage in any, in any election. That's a basic fact. Those of you who are in this class right now, you have names that start with A through Z. And as a result, some of your homework gets graded, in different times than, so there are aspects to order that matter for when you're judging things. So whenever I'm grading, and I really do this, I try to randomize the order of the exams or whatever I'm grading because of this factor. And if they weren't randomizing, names in a ballot, there would be artificial weighting. There would be an artificial advantage to those who are first, certainly, and secondarily last. So there you go. All right. Okay. Now, when people store things in their memory with time, these are revised. Okay. So I have an experience. Shortly after that experience, you might say, I can really reliably extract quite a bit of detail from that experience. So this is what we call verbatim memory. Like, I just saw a crime committed. I'm a witness of a crime. Okay. I just saw it happen. I can tell you everything about the perpetrator. I can tell you, I can tell you what color shirt they were wearing. I can tell you where everybody was at the scene. This is going to last for a little while, and I'm going to be very confident. Like, I saw exactly what happened. I know exactly what happened. So maybe it takes a little bit for the investigators, to come and talk to me. And let's say this is a week later. Well, I'm still confident I knew exactly what happened. But a week later, a lot of what were true, details, but were really not necessarily seem to be that relevant, like what color the guy's shirt is, for example. That might kind of fade and kind of get fuzzy, and then it's corruptible, and it may end up being stored as something then different than what truly happens. So we call this converting to the gist of a memory. I remember roughly what happened, right? I remember there was a crime, there were 3 or 4 people, or whatever. The gist is basically here's everything I could possibly remember about this episode, this event, and extract from that what at the time your cognition feels is the most relevant, the most meaningful parts of that experience. And those get the precious storage space, in your warehouse. Okay. So you have this, I roughly remember what it was like when I drove a car for the first time, Now, I don't remember all of the details of what it felt like to have my hands on the steering wheel or when I buckled my seatbelt or anything like that. I just remember being afraid and turning the wrong way, turning the wrong way on our one-way street. This is on my mind right now. My son is going through the driver training. So, but in any case, history, our memories, anything that's before, the recent past is likely stored in this gist form. So it lasts much longer because you're emphasizing what matters here. So like, if you remember, Jesus as a person, and you remember all those details, and then, this is a bad example maybe, but this, taking the basic properties here and presenting them there, you can miss out on a lot of true details, that might make that experience very different. Yes, so gist memory is corruptible, and the way that happens is I couldn't quite, let's say I stored, moment of someone with a blue shirt committed a crime. A week later, a year later, nobody is asked about the color of the shirt, and I'm in trial, I'm a witness in trial, and they say, tell us what happened. And you say, well, I saw this person and they did these things. And then the defense says, were they wearing a red shirt? And I might say, I think they were. Yeah. And I'm imagining in my head, were they wearing a red shirt? It's not part of the verb. It's not important enough for me to have stored it in a verbatim, absolutely correct way. It's like, at the time, I never would have thought that the color of the shirt really was an important part of this experience to encode, to store. And so I have not a great stored piece of data about what, color the shirt is. So when somebody asks me, hey, was he wearing a red shirt? And I imagine in my head, was that person wearing a red shirt? I'm literally recreating in my mind imagery in which I am putting a red shirt on this person and thinking, is that what happened? Okay. And when I create that artificial image and I think about it, sometimes your brain gets confused as to what is the artificial constructed image and what is actually what happened in your degrading and didn't encode all the deep details memory. Okay, so this gist memory can very easily become corrupted through suggestion after the fact, after the original experience. And this happens more so with experts. So this is one example where getting smarter doesn't make you better at some things, because experts are less likely to doubt themselves. Experts are more likely to be especially confident in their memories, and they don't realize how corruptible, if I'm just going to extract the meaning, what I think is meaningful at this time, they don't realize how corruptible those gist memories are. Okay, this is a very classic study that illustrates this. So event memory done, so Loftus and her colleague, she's a psychologist, still very, very prominent. You'll find her name in a lot of different major aspects of psychology. So, she did this study with her colleagues where they showed people in 1979. So we had 1979 imagery, right? So get ready for it. But they would show a series of slides depicting an accident, and there would be, things like this. So a car at an intersection, there's trees, there's a road, there's a sign. And you'll notice one key difference here, there's a stop sign and there's a yield sign. It's otherwise designed to be identical imagery, okay? So half of the people get each of these, and there's no comment made on it. It's just basically like, there was an accident, study these pictures. Okay. All right. Now we're going to ask people. So they saw the slides, put them down. And we're going to say, hey, did another car pass the red Toyota when it was stopped at the stop sign? So we're asking about, is there another car passing here? But they threw in this little detail, the stop sign or the yield sign, right? And people are kind of they're not being asked, is there a stop sign or is there a yield sign? They say, is there a car going past when the car was stopped at the whatever they said, okay? So people are thinking, now I'm revisiting the gist memory of this, and no, I can feel very clearly that there was no vehicle in front of this person, right? In this other car. So I can say no. And 90% of people could answer that question correctly. But this little inception, of the stop sign or the yield sign starts to shape this gist memory. So weeks later, bring in the same participants, show them the same slides or whatever, here's a set of slides and here's a set of slides. Which one did you see? Did you see this picture or this picture? And they only saw one of the two, but based on how the questions were asked, there was an ability to corrupt that memory. So half of the people who had inconsistencies basically they'd get only about chance. They'd be actually they're wrong more often than they're correct. So this is basically showing that if this little inception point, it was included in that question, people would form a false memory or that included this sign, even though they never saw that, right? So this example of the corruptibility of this gist memory. And again, the key thing here, the thing to think about is the stop sign or the yield sign were not important aspects of this experience when people were viewing those slides, okay? They viewed them, they encoded some aspects of it. Their gist memory says red car, stopped at intersection, nothing else there, trees, road. Okay, so then, later on, we've implanted aspects of that were, they worked, that, it makes sense to say this could be a yield sign or a stop sign. And then you just kind of drop a little detail in there, maybe even unintentionally. I mean, these were intentional in this experiment, but you can imagine how someone might, innocently ask a question in which they have some incorrect details that get sort of ignored, but then end up incepting this memory. And the person who has this false memory is not aware that it's a false memory. They think they really saw that, okay? And again, it's because if you relive something in your mind, you imagine something in trying to remember it, your brain can be confused between that artificially created false memory that you were creatively, generating in your own head and your actual life experience. Those two can get mixed up. All right, there you go. So what are the implications of this? I already talked about, well, when I saw that crime in the blue shirt or the red shirt or whatever, just realize that this form of memory, gist memory, is quite corruptible. It's susceptible to false memories. There are some examples of like child psychologists or psychiatrists who would accidentally implant these sorts of like bad memories in young children, and those memories could persist for the person's entire life. So there are cases of, Loftus talks about, psychiatrists that would ask, hey, do you remember that time when you got lost in the mall as a child? And these people, no, I don't, wait a minute. Yeah, I think I was. And then you start, you just start imagining what that might have been like. We've all probably had some moment in our childhood where there's ambiguous negative memory. And if we start thinking about that and somebody asks us, hey, do you remember when this happened? And they do it in a way that is somewhat suggestive of it could have happened, okay? You form this false memory, you construct this memory to think, did that happen? And then suddenly that becomes your memory that to you, I'm telling the truth on the stand, this is what I saw, I swear. And they're not lying, but they're not correct. They're false. They're false memories, right? So yes, can be inadvertently implanted, and that's that's been, psychiatrists know this now. So there are different ways in which developmental psychiatry works. But just to keep that in mind, you ask a child, hey, did something bad happen to you at daycare today? And oh, sure, I got bit by a dinosaur. And okay, you could then you could really you could convince that child that yes, you did in fact get attacked by a dinosaur one time in daycare, and they may have a lasting memory from that or whatever. All right, so just to realize it, and it's not just young children, it happens all through our lives. Young children are a little more susceptible because they have less of a grasp of that was a real thing versus that was imagination, right? All right. In studies, they've also shown when there is a police lineup like this. I don't know if they really do this anymore. Like, this always the movie cliche here. One of my favorite movies, by the way, Usual Suspects. So if I was a witness to the blue shirt guy crime, and there happened to be somebody on this, on this police lineup who I saw maybe later that day, and I bought a sandwich from them or something. And that was a traumatic day, but it was weeks ago or years ago. And I know I've seen this person before, and somehow when I see this person, I get this little inkling of them being associated with that day. And oh yeah, it must have been oh yep, that's the blue shirt guy, right? So this guy just sold me a hot dog, around the corner 2 hours after the attack, but I didn't store this person with enough verbatim information to remember exactly what they played in this negative memory. They're just part of it. They're just associated with it. And so I might say, hey, this guy's the one I saw, and I'm certain of that. My false memory can convince me of that, right? And the witness would be unaware of this, this flawed identification. So again, this is known. This has been proven, in experimental, and so as a result, the U.S. system, at least, it's illegal for an investigator to comment one way or another if they're doing any sort of police lineup stuff. So if somebody says, I think it's that person, is it that person? And they turn and they look at the prosecutor or the investigator, and the investigator goes, oh yeah, or whatever however they react, this is going to reinforce, or it's going to significantly impact the confidence that somebody has in an ambiguous memory. All right. I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. Tune in for the 8.5. We'll do a little more on the design for memory.